Hi, my name is Kerri McKenna-Reese. I'm a trauma recovery coach in private practice, and I'm also an accredited instructor certifying others on the impact of complex trauma, as well as a LIFT online learning facilitator and coach here at the Tim Fletcher Company. I never in a million years saw myself in this field when I was young. I felt different than everyone else. I didn't know who I was as an individual or how to connect with others. I didn't feel connected or attached to anyone, not my parents, friends, or family members. Connection scared me. I wanted to fit in, but at the same time, I feared being rejected. I didn't feel I was good enough, lovable, valuable, or worthy enough to be in the life of others, to be happy. I felt broken, incapable, stupid, ugly, and weak. And I never felt like I fit in. I didn't feel like I'd ever be enough. And I didn't understand myself, my feelings, or my emotions. They showed up in ways that failed me time and time again, validating my thoughts and feelings of inadequacy. I felt flawed in all areas of my life. All of that is a result of my childhood, the way I was treated, talked to, and taken care of by my parents and other family members. Growing up, I felt like my life was pointless. It wasn't always that way. As a toddler, I was lively and creative. I clearly remember wanting to be a dancer and a singer. I wanted to shine my little light on the world in a glorious way. I wanted to celebrate and share the love flowing from my soul with the world in a way that brought joy to myself and everyone around me. Then when I was 2 years old, a huge snowstorm hit the city where we lived, and everything was buried. I remember it very vividly because that is not only my first memory of snow, but it's also my very first memory of being sexually abused by a member of my own family. And I was paralyzed with fear. I believe it was in that moment that my soul dipped its toes in survival mode, because when it was over, I recall promising myself in my own 2-year-old way, when I grow up, I will be better than that. I didn't view myself as shameful. I knew that something bad had happened to me. He had really hurt me, but I knew it wasn't my fault, and I knew it wasn't who I was. And as courageous as that sounds for a 2-year-old little girl, the abuse left me wrapped in a profound fear, and I was incredibly angry that my love had been violated. And what made it worse was the fact that I was pre-verbal. I didn't know how to tell my parents. I didn't have the words, the vocabulary, or the understanding to convey to them what had happened or what continued to happen. There was a lot of chaos in my home when I was little. My dad had been married before. He had older boys when I was 4 years old, and after a nasty, in-your-face battle with only weekend visitations, his sons came to live with us. And my older brother and I, we were just 15 months apart, and we were incredibly close and loving to each other when we were young. But the amount of dysfunction this brought to our home, and our parents' lack of emotional maturity, destroyed any resemblance of the close sibling bond that we once shared. My parents weren't just unavailable. They were emotionally detached and disengaged. They were not nurturing in any way, and not being connected with them left me feeling really empty inside. My father was a good man. He came from a long line of emotional stuffers, though. No one felt or processed their feelings, and he struggled to communicate. So to avoid anxiety and conversations deeper than surface level, he kept quiet, right? He retreated to his bedroom after work and kept to himself. I was 15 and in the hospital about to have surgery before he told me that he loved me. I never felt I had to be, cautious or sneaky around him. I mean, he rarely spoke, but when he did, I listened. He shared nuggets of wisdom with me over the years in casual conversations. But I didn't truly have a full, meaningful, deep conversation with my dad until I was 26. Now, interactions with my mother were quite different. Everything was swept under the rug. Any kind of emotional expression was belittled to avoid addressing the deeper issue. And she also created a lot of chaos within our home, where I was constantly yelled at. There were no boundaries and no conversations were had. My mother treated my brother and the older boys as if they were priceless and could do no wrong. And that was talked about by everybody in the family. My mother, for whatever reason, did not like me, and I felt this deeply. I was not good enough. And they grew into juvenile delinquents and addicts. But don't get me wrong, I made plenty of poor decisions. I went to places I shouldn't have gone. I hung out with people I shouldn't have been keeping. I experimented with drugs and alcohol. And I gave myself to guys because I didn't feel I had a right to say no, a right to fight for me or honor myself. I was no angel, but the time and attention it took to address their delinquencies left little time for me to even be seen. They were in and out of correctional facilities and prison. And for a pat on the back, my mother stepped in each and every time to pick up the pieces for them. There was never any discipline handed down or accountability required. And to gain power and control over me in any situation, she'd sow seeds of self-doubt and confusion. She'd distort reality in such a way that it forced me to question myself and the decisions I made or were contemplating. She manipulated any way she could, no matter who she hurt or how much pain she caused, and she always made sure I felt at fault, like I was to blame. It was never her fault. So her actions made me feel bad about myself as a person. If I ever shared a thought or expressed any kind of feeling, she'd say things that validated my feelings of inferiority, right? I was not valued. My thoughts or feelings did not matter. And so over the years, my mother would ask me, why can't you be more like your brothers? And I never understood this. I was the youngest of 5. Between sexually abusing me and always staying in trouble, they weren't setting a very good example. And she also accused me of being jealous of her relationship with them. But I wasn't jealous. I needed a mother, someone to honor me, nurture me, someone to seek justice for me and keep me safe. I needed to feel seen, heard, and valued. I needed to know that someone cared about me, that someone loved me, that I was important. And I didn't get any of that from my parents. It was shame parenting. That was the go-to for discipline or dealing with any kind of situation in our home. And sarcasm was the language of the land to avoid feelings in the midst of any behavior or interaction. Their parenting style bestowed upon me intense feelings of personal inadequacy, a strong lingering belief that I was deficient or was limited in my abilities to do anything compared to everyone else. And I never had confidence in myself, my abilities, or trust in the voice of my soul. I learned at a very early age that I was not safe and emotional expression was not safe. I also learned that love was conditional, and not just conditional, but distorted. To receive love, the message was, what can you do to make me happy, Kerri? Or what can I take from you to make me happy, Kerri? Those were the rules for receiving love. And as a child, you're at the mercy of the adults and the older siblings around you. So you sell your soul just to do what you can to feel a sense of safety. I was incredibly lonely as a child. I sucked my thumb until I was 9. I was sad, angry, and scared, and I found myself really struggling to crawl out of the depths of despair quite often. When I was 4 years old, my older brother and I were lured onto the boxcar on the railroad tracks by an older cousin where I was sexually abused. It was extremely terrifying. My older brother, he was my hero, though, that day, and he helped me out of that boxcar and held my hand all the way home. He could explain what I couldn't yet comprehend or speak of, and he told my mother. When he told our mother, in my mind, he was saving my life. I didn't know how to tell, and up until that point, the fear I was experiencing was paralyzing. Our mother promised us both that she'd tell our father when he got home, and he'd handle it. He'd take care of things. We didn't need to worry about it anymore. And then a few nights later, we were abused again, and it was my father's oldest son. It was no longer just on the weekend visits, because now he was living in our home full time with a bedroom right next to mine. So the next morning, my brother and I stood before our mother holding hands, only this time I told her. And she said, damn it, Kerri, you need to stop all this nonsense. Good little girls don't behave this way. And I stood there at 4 years old asking myself, what had I done wrong? I didn't want those dirty things to be done to me. Why was I such a bad girl? What was wrong with me? I remember the look on my brother's face as he left the room that day. And it's still the same look he has on his face in pictures today. My mother then immediately took me in the living room, where she opened this big white leather-bound Bible full of colorful pictures. Now, we didn't go to church, so I had no idea what a Bible was or anything about God or Jesus. And she pointed to a baby named Jesus and told me about God. And she explained that she wanted me to learn about myself because I was a child of God. And the Bible was the book of life where it all started and how things should be. And as she read the stories, I learned that God was everywhere and he saw everything and there was no secrets from him. He was a healer, a protector, and a provider to all that deserved. And then I recalled how she shamed me earlier and my heart sank. I felt somehow I was responsible for the things that were happening to me. I internalized that as I was disgraceful, and that's why God wasn't protecting me. He didn't approve of my improper behavior and immoral acts. I felt like the worst of the worst kind of sinners in that moment. I mean, that's how I processed the whole situation. I was a little bitty 4-year-old girl. I didn't know any better, and I didn't have the tools to see it any other way. It was in that moment with my mother that I became someone I was not. At 4 years old, I unconsciously made a pact. I tucked my authentic self away deep down inside of me for no one else to see. And I took on the identity of a trauma survivor, showing up as a chameleon in every interaction, in every relationship, every minute of every single day. And I became who I thought others wanted me to be, simply to feel a sense of safety. I made myself small, unseen, unheard, unworthy, unlovable, so everyone else could feel big, strong, powerful, and in control. It was a veneer that shielded me from the reality of my life, the brutal side of what was really going on. It was easier to deal with life as a chameleon. That is how I was able to survive, to maintain a sense of safety. And then after that, my mother went around and told the entire family and everyone we knew that I was a liar, not to believe anything I said. And she did this in front of me. And then over the years, I was called a liar by everyone for everything. I was spanked, hit, yelled at, and criticized by people for telling the truth, because my mother said I was not to be believed. The physical and verbal abuse, it was never ending. That day, that interaction with my mother, it left me on the cutting room floor. It bestowed in me that I was bad. Everything was my fault. I should be ashamed of myself, and I didn't deserve to be treated any better. It was who I was, right? And I was treated that way because of who I was, and I was powerless to stop it. So from that moment on, my whole world, it felt physically wrong. It took from me any sense of self that I once had. I had no idea who I was or who I was supposed to be. It derailed my intuition and changed how I would forever walk in the world. And from there, I built a fortress of emotional solitude where I locked myself away. And the pain I carried was as deep as my secrets. I clearly remember walking up the street at 10 years old, asking myself, was I born to just be abused? What is my reason for having a life? So by the age of 10, I had plenty of reasons to hate God. And there was not a piece of me that did not feel shame or live in fear. And it wasn't just my surroundings that I feared. It was also the anger that flowed through my veins. I met my rage that day. It erupted in me like a tsunami, and it came with a host of other feelings and emotions that I didn't understand. And for many years, that anger, it ran my life. I was tense, nervous, and fearful. I had no idea how to relax. I felt guilty for things I hadn't even done, and I had no idea why. I felt like a liar when I was telling the truth, and I was also resentful towards other people, and it was written all over my face. The only blessing hidden there was the drive the anger gave me. I unconsciously used it over the years as a catalyst to move forward. And I believe it's because of that very first promise I made to my authentic self when I said, when I grow up, I will be better than that. That promise played in my head like a recording. It came to mind every time I did something that didn't serve me well. And I'd have conversations with my inner child. And those conversations gave my locked away authentic self moments of courage and clarity as I navigated my life. Now, knowing what I know about trauma today, I'm quite sure I lived in fear and felt alone from the day I was born. For years, I struggled making decisions because I didn't know how to be me. I was afraid of doing or saying the wrong thing, of looking stupid, of being rejected, or not being believed. So I negotiated myself in every relationship. I would ask myself questions about those very things after every interaction. Did I sound stupid? Did they like my hair, my makeup, my clothes? Do they respect me? Do they even like me? I said yes when I wanted to say no because fear had its grips on me. And I showed up as a chameleon in every interaction simply to get my needs met, to feel loved, honored, respected, and accepted. I walked into every relationship with one foot in the door and one foot out of fear of getting hurt, and I trusted no one. I hung around with people I knew were not good for me because I didn't feel I deserved to be treated any better. And my relationships with them validated all the ill will I had towards myself. The abuse was perpetual too. It wasn't just my father's oldest son and the cousin. There was the uncle and the neighbors that couldn't keep their hands to themselves, and grown men, family friends that didn't say inappropriate things to me as a child. It was also the moms that knew, and the aunts and the uncles that knew or suspected, but never stepped in. And the abuse, it ran the gamut: physical, sexual, verbal, emotional, spiritual. And then there were the triggers. I had to relive every one of those traumatic events over and over again in real time. Every time I saw someone or something that reminded me of the abuse in some way: a person, a smell, a song, a TV show, the weather, even my older brother who had suffered right along with me. So my nervous system, it stayed in a state of hypervigilance, leaving a displacement of my feelings as I navigated life full of anxiety and panic. And it showed up on my face, in my body language, and in my actions as I took it out on those around me that really did care. I mean, have you ever seen someone standing in front of you or across the room that has a body language that silently screams, "I'm angry"? It's the person that you feel is not approachable. Well, that was me. I was not approachable. My heart, mind, and soul were visibly angry, but at the same time, I didn't feel I had a right to that anger. I found courage to tell my mother twice as a little girl, as a toddler, only 4 years old. And I think about that now and how incredibly courageous that was. Because for decades after that, I didn't have an ounce of courage that that little girl did. I lived in fear of everyone and everything. I was forced to desert all those wonderful pieces of myself to conform to situations, showing up as a chameleon in every relationship, to feel a sense of safety in my everyday life. And I no longer had room to love me, right? Being shamed by my mother, it taught me that I didn't have a right to say no. People were allowed to treat me any way they wanted, and I had no right to defend myself, have boundaries, or speak about it. That was love and respect in my family. That was how you were valued. That is where my superpower in the form of disassociation stepped in. I put that on like a suit of armor, and I disassociated from all my feelings. And that became my lifeline. Escapism, it was survival to me. I escaped into another world when I was being abused. And emotionally, I lived in a very, very dark place, and I felt helpless. We moved into a new house when I was 3. And I remember standing in the driveway, dragging my foot through the gravel, asking myself, how long will we live in this house? How long will it be before my parents get divorced? Now, some might say I was a small child with an old soul or full of profound wisdom, but the reality was that I lived in fear of everyone and everything, including my own thoughts, opinions, and decisions. I didn't trust others or myself, and I questioned everything and everybody and doubted everything, everybody, including myself. Tim talks about the child jumping off the roof because a parent promises to catch them, but the parent doesn't. The parent laughs and promises again and again to catch the child, and each time the child, who was so full of love and faith in their parents, forgives, climbs back on top that roof and jumps off again, never to be caught, right? They hit the ground and get hurt every time. That was life in my home as a little girl. Family members, my father's older sons, their friends, the neighbors, they promised not to hurt me when they invited me to play, and I showed up with any kind of hesitation, right? I wanted to play. I wanted to feel loved, accepted, and have fun. And that's the heart and soul of any child. But they hurt me each and every time. I agreed to play not because I liked being abused, but because that was the trade-off. My locked away authentic self would internally be screaming, no! But the trauma identity took over because I needed connection to survive, even if that connection was only superficial. We're all born these intuitive little beings with a great love for ourselves and others. And I wanted nothing more than to connect with others with my singing and my dancing. I wanted to shine my light on the world. That's what we're born most passionate about. And we show this in the way that we express ourselves. But my environment told me I was not good enough. It forced me to abandon myself, to lock my authentic self away, to deny the love I had for my personal being from my life. And this left me to navigate the world in a profound fear. And I was surviving in a variety of unhealthy ways, seeking what I'd lost and creating what I feared. I agreed to play because I needed to feel like I fit in, to feel like I was loved and a part of a family. And my authentic self knew it was wrong. My whole being said, this is not going to turn out good. But I played with them anyway because I needed that connection to survive as a little girl. I was sexually abused the night before I was to have my very first school picture taken. That morning, my mother said, "Pictures tell a story worth 1,000 words, Kerri, so you have to look nice." Now, I was scared then that my picture was going to tell the world why my mother didn't love me and why I didn't deserve to be loved. And when the picture came in and they were passed around the family, I was struck that no one saw the sadness and the loneliness I saw in the picture. My picture spoke to no one. It had no words. No one saw my pain. No one stepped in to help. And this validated my feelings of unworthiness. Remembering that very first promise I made to myself, I took that picture, and it's the one sitting directly behind me, and I made another promise to myself, and I promised to love that little girl. Now, I tried to save her many times over the years. In my primary years, I moved the neighbors from my bedroom window, hoping they'd send help. I was 5. No one asked any questions, and I got spanked. I told my school teacher I had 6 dads, hoping they'd send the police to investigate. I think I was 6. My younger cousin and I both pulled our pants down at her house. This happened twice. She was being abused too. We were telling each other our stories. We both got spanked. No questions were asked. Then the second time she told her mom, and to keep the peace in the family, they moved away without saying a word to my parents. So my welfare was not even considered. We weren't being bad little girls. We suffered a trauma. We were trying to sort out our feelings, trying to communicate what we didn't fully understand. We were doing what every trauma survivor does. We were reacting normally to some very abnormal circumstances. I love to read, and in the 2nd grade, I read the book Jack and the Beanstalk. And I told myself after reading that book that when I got older, I'd write a book about the monsters in my life, and I would save myself in the end. My parents divorced that same year. I was 7, and the older boys were staying with Dad, and they asked my brother and I who we wanted to live with. Now, I wanted to stay with my dad, but I thought by moving with my mother, I'd be saving myself and the sexual abuse would stop. I didn't know about the divorce, so I didn't know that the older boys would be visiting and later moving in. So the sexual abuse went on for another 8 years, and I never told another soul about the abuse for fear of losing their love and respect. And there were others in my life that nurtured me. And this enabled me to garner more resilience over the years. My aunt was one of those people. She was my mother's older sister. And by the time I was a teenager, I had really bonded with her. And in some ways, she was a good source of support when I needed it, but I didn't feel safe telling her my secrets. Her daughter was 9 years older than me, and she was sexually assaulted in her home when I was about 7. And she was shamed for it in front of all of us by her mother. And that was the same aunt I was close to. So this further validated my feelings of not having a voice and choice in how I was treated, of not being lovable or worthy of anything better. I had hair down in my waist until December of my 3rd grade year. I was just shy of turning 8 when I begged my mother for a short haircut like the other boys in the hopes that the sexual abuse would stop. My hair was cut, but the sexual abuse did not stop, and the days rolled into years, and I just struggled to cope. I really thought God hated me, and I didn't understand why. My mother, she moved us in with her boyfriend when I was 11, and he was a functioning alcoholic, and he beat her. And sometimes my brother and I would find ourselves locked out of the house or left out on the streets. I remember that promise I made to my authentic self as a little girl, and I made another promise to her. I will never let a man treat me that way. Growing up, my soul really hungered for deep connection, love, and affection, more than my body probably hungered for food, and I didn't feel connected to anyone. I thought that if I just do this or I just do that, my mother will love me. I tried over and over again to build some kind of connection with her, but no matter what I did, it was criticized and not good enough. So I found myself wading through depression a lot, especially in the wintertime. It was agonizing. I was surviving, but oftentimes I was contemplating my own fate. I didn't know how to self-soothe, and my anxiety was so bad in my adolescence that I hyperventilated a lot, ending up in the hospital each time it happened. It would hit me out of nowhere, and no one ever asked any questions, and I was too afraid and too ashamed to speak out. The doctors at the emergency room always accused me of being on drugs, only to discover that they were wrong when the blood test came back. I was called a liar repeatedly by them, and this validated my feelings of not being able to trust other people. I read a lot of books to dissociate. I'm not just talking about teen reads or romance novels. I read those too. But I also had my nose in a lot of self-help books, anything to escape and dream of a better life while I sat in detention after school for not behaving according to how they felt I should. So by the time I was a teenager, I was searching the back of milk cartons praying to see my face, and I'm serious when I say that. Over the years, the shame I felt, it became toxic as I disregarded and negotiated and pushed away all those unique and wonderful pieces of myself for crumbs of love, crumbs of acceptance, crumbs of affection, just for a small, superficial sense of safety and worth. The pain and confusion I carried, it left me vulnerable. I had so many unresolved feelings and emotions that I garnered a lot of unhealthy people into my life where I was traumatized over and over again. The psychopaths, the narcissists, the gaslighters, they were all in my life at one time. I mean, how do you tell the world you're drowning when your lungs are full of water? It's through your behavior, of course. I was angry and rebellious because I had never been nurtured or loved in a healthy way, and because I had never had anyone to honor me or seek justice for me. I was angry because as a toddler, the adults responsible for my care fed me to the world like a sacrificial lamb, forcing me to fight battles I had no wisdom or power to fight. And then as I grew up, they all stood back and criticized my behavior and all the mistakes I made just trying to survive every day. My behavior was telling the world all about my pain, but the world wasn't listening. And it wasn't just my behavior, it was my brothers and the older boys. They were struggling to survive as well. They coped with drugs and alcohol addictions, right? They would come home inebriated, get arrested, or find themselves going through withdrawals. I would remember that promise I made to myself as a little girl, and I'd make another promise, and I'd say, I will never get addicted to drugs or alcohol. I made all these promises to my locked away authentic self, but I wasn't shown respect, so I didn't feel I deserved it, and I certainly didn't know how to demand it, and I wasn't loved in a healthy way, so I didn't think I was entitled to that, and my sense of love was distorted. And I had no idea what healthy love was for me or anyone for that matter. And my personal boundaries were not honored, and there were absolutely no boundaries in my home or in the example set for me, so I didn't feel I had a right to those either. And when I was 15 years old, I attempted suicide. I swallowed a handful of pills. And my mother stood over me screaming, "You're such a selfish person, Kerri, truly pathetic. I don't have time for this shit." And she was saying this to me as the paramedics were carrying me out of the house. No conversations were had, no questions were asked. I wasn't shown empathy or compassion, and no one grasped the fact that failing to take my own life placed me back on the edge, and I was more than desperate to jump. And this further validated my feelings of unworthiness. Somewhere along the line, I learned to color to self-soothe, and I wrote my thoughts and feelings on paper to express them and sort them out in a healthy way. And I wrote down all the words I needed to hear, and I spoke kind words to myself in the mirror, and I drew pictures I needed to see, and I was creating vision boards before vision boards were a thing. And this taught me how to sit alone with myself in a creative, inspiring, safe space where I could tap into and learn about the deepest parts of me. Now, this is just a really small piece of my childhood. I was raised on damage. I survived on rage, and my psyche was held together by a spit and a prayer. It's what we know in this industry as soul murder. The sexual abuse in my family, it stopped when I was 15 years old, but their fingerprints and words, they didn't fade from my life. The way I processed what I'd suffered was embedded in my being. And I've mentioned a lot in my talk today about, the struggles I dealt with over the years. A person doesn't walk away from 13 years of sexual abuse unscathed. I was the poster child of the 60 characteristics of trauma by the time I hit the age of 8. I had a mother wound, a father wound, and every other kind of wound you can imagine, emotional or otherwise. And not only was I stuck in this cycle of profound grief, I was also stuck in a cycle of profound fear, right? I was repeatedly abandoned by my parents and everyone around me. I used to think the words "I love you" were the greatest lie ever told. And immediately after I attempted to end my own life, I became overwhelmed with the thought of get away and never look back. And it was present in my mind daily. And I refer to it as a thought, but through my healing, I've come to learn that it was a message from my authentic self. It came directly from my soul, my own personal power, and it's what I needed. And I didn't understand it. But the following year, I was blessed enough to move in with my dad. Now, the resentment I had towards him for not stopping the abuse, it was great. I respected him, but we did not see eye to eye. He lectured me on the boys I dated or something I'd done, but I didn't feel he had a right to say anything about my decisions or my well-being. He didn't step in to save me as a child when I needed him most, so I wasn't interested in his concern. And then the summer before my senior year of high school, he retired and decided to move to Alabama. And when he asked me to go with him, I could not get my bags packed quick enough. In my mind, this was going to be a new start for me. Life would finally be awesome. So we moved, and I struggled. My world had been physically wrong for so long, and I felt broken, and the culture shock of Southern living was really hard to adjust to. I finished high school and went to college, but I had a hard time making friends, especially female friends, since I had a significant mother wound. I met guy after guy, just like those in my childhood. I got married and divorced. What I saw as healthier than my own family was still toxic when it came to relationships. Growing up in pervasive trauma, I really learned how to live, cope, and relate in very unhealthy ways to survive. And because of that, as I got older, I became the source of more trauma because my nervous system was wired to all those old feelings and emotions of the past. And I continued to do unhealthy things and make unhealthy decisions to stay safe, to feel safe, loved, and valued. I didn't understand my own needs and values and why I needed them met to be happy or healthy and thrive. So my career was taken off, but I was not good at relationship stuff. I didn't understand myself or people, and I put everyone else before myself. Over the years, I'd bury my feelings, but they were there. They just sat inside me until something came along and triggered them, and then they'd come alive in real time, and I'd be an emotional wreck in a puddle of vulnerability, and I'd have no idea why. And not understanding what I needed, I had no idea how to express myself in an emotionally mature way. I got back on my feet after the divorce, and I bought a house, the whole time working on myself. I struggled at the bottom of the well for many years, barely surviving, just trying to dig my way out, and I fell over and over again before finally getting my footing. I mentioned anger earlier. That's an understatement. I was filled with rage, and in my early 20s, and after suffering another emotional blow, my locked away authentic self, that inner child of mine, little Kerri, started asking me a couple of really profound questions. She asked, what would happen if you started listening to your gut? What would happen if you honored and loved me? My soul, it needed me to nurture my inner child, to gain awareness of myself and awareness of who I was, what I needed, and where I fit in. And that need was starting to outweigh the fear of change and living my everyday life. As a child, I felt powerless to help myself. As a young adult, though, remembering all the conversations I had with my authentic self, all those promises I made to me, I realized that I held an incredible gift. And it's a gift we're born with. It's the gift I gave to myself each and every time I made one of those promises to me. And that gift is the power I had within me to serve myself well, to show up in this world on my terms every moment of every day, the way I choose to. And this gift became my new superpower, my lifeline as I went on a mission to answer those questions, to learn how to love, accept, and honor me, to learn how to be my own person. So I came to terms with the fact that I could not change the past. Then I threw myself into getting to know me for who I really am, understanding my needs and why I have those needs. And I let my experiences of the past teach me who not to be. And I threw myself into loving me without knowing how, when, or where. I also threw myself into understanding others. I started sharing the secrets I'd been forced to keep to get the poison out of my system, to release the shame. I felt if I had nothing to hide, I had nothing to fear. I stopped fighting for relationships with individuals who were okay with losing me. That was a big one. And this included friends and family. No one was an exception. I let the actions of others show me how much I meant to them. I also let their actions tell me who they were. A liar lied, a cheater cheated, a thief stole, a narcissist had an unreasonably high sense of their own importance, and a gaslighter planted seeds of uncertainty. I listened to what their actions were telling me, and I accepted them for exactly who they were and removed them from my life or placed them accordingly. I stopped worrying about whether people liked me, and I started focusing on whether they were good to have in my life. If I didn't value the way they lived their life, I didn't value their opinion. And distance became my answer to disrespect. Now, none of this went over well with my mother. Neither did my setting boundaries for myself or my child. She retaliated. And in my late 20s, I stood up and honored myself as the abuse came to light in a court of law, where I learned that my mother never told my father about the incident on the railroad tracks. He was never given a chance to stop that abuse. He spent the rest of his life trying to right a wrong that wasn't his. But he committed to stand by whatever I needed to do to heal. And from that, a lot of deep conversations happened. Conversations where I learned that my father was a trauma survivor as well. And he spent years working through his own anger and grief. And I understood then why he always was so quiet. He was just trying to maintain a space where he felt safe. Emotionally, I took 2 steps back. I was exhausted from the mind drama. I was full of self-pity, and I would unload on my dad, and he became my safe space. And then one day when I was done, he said, "Kerri, no one has power over you today but you. And what you need to do is choose what you want to fight for, the past or the future. Your self-sabotaging bullshit or your freedom. Your happiness and healing are in your hand. And if your hatreds towards your mother or those that abuse you outweighs any affection you have towards your own happiness, nothing in your life can be undone." And there was a brutal truth. My childhood had a front row seat in my life, and it gave me a gut full of reasons to hate and be angry, but I only needed one, to be grateful. I had no idea what genuine love was. No one ever modeled that for me. And I didn't have a clue as to who I was. There was so much about me that I didn't understand. I was even confused about what to be grateful for. And what I needed was to find just one person who had lived a childhood like mine and survived the reliving of the memories and the feelings. A person who could relate to me and genuinely love me. And I knew if there was just one person out there, there was hope for me. And this is where my journey began and why I'm here today. I found not just one person, but over time, a large group of people much like myself. I volunteered at local establishments like crisis services, where I met other men and women who were not only helping others, but healing themselves. I raised money for those in need. I donated my time to help others. And it was through those incredible relationships that I learned how to step into my authentic self and be present in the moment and build healthy relationships. So armed with a list of my relationship needs, why I have those needs and boundaries to honor them, I learned to stop negotiating myself, and I found a purpose for my pain and a reason to be grateful for my life. It was the opportunity to love and nurture myself in a way no one else had. And it was the opportunity to heal on my terms and build a life I love, surrounded by those that selflessly chose to honor, nurture, and respect me. And they gave me strength to keep all those promises I had made to myself by lovingly holding me accountable when I relapsed. Trauma survivors most times They don't have the capacity to have compassion for themselves because they were taught that they were not lovable. We cultivated compassion, courage, and curiosity in each other. They modeled these for me, and we celebrated our wins and growth and prosperity. So I have over 20 years of healing behind me. And there are so many different dimensions to trauma that to this day, me getting to know myself, stepping into my vulnerability is a daily choice. Every time I discover a trigger or a mask, I have to deeply look at it, sit in that pain, understand it, and take the time to heal it. That has been the most difficult part of my journey. It's getting comfortable in the uncomfortable, befriending all that I dislike and fear to understand it, right? The stories I've shared with you today, they were pivotal moments in my life. I mentioned my older brother, the hero I needed as a little girl. He is one. He is the one and only connection I have ever had from birth. We are only 15 months apart. We suffered, cried, and survived together as little kids, but we never held hands again a day in our life after telling our mother and the shame that she bestowed, with emotions locked away and walls built. It was a struggle to be friends after that. And it's the most heartbreaking of all relationships I've ever had to mourn. And the grief today is still deeply felt. He never physically hurt me, but being around him was a constant reminder of what we had suffered, and our relationship couldn't move past that. I needed someone to blame, someone to punish. So I punished him and everyone else because I knew no better. People are really surprised that I don't have room for hate today, but over the years, as I learned about trauma, I learned how deep dysfunction and abuse goes back in my family tree. My parents were trauma survivors themselves. They raised us with their own set of coping mechanisms and survival skills, and it bleeds through generations on both sides of my family. For those that hurt me, I know their pain. I don't excuse their behavior, don't get me wrong, but I can't hate them. I don't have to have them in my life, but I also cannot hate them for the anguish that they bear. It's pain I know and understand so well. Being consistently shown compassion in my own healing journey, I learned how to have compassion for myself, my younger parts, and others. And I honestly feel like I have lived 3 lives, right? It's quite possible I'm on my 4th, and I hope I have more than a cat, because each life I spiritually evolve into, it gets better than the last. And I'm so passionate about helping others on their journey to heal. My innocence was stolen, and my intuition was derailed, and I was forced to abandon myself. That was my first life. And my teenage years, they were my prodigal years. I made a lot of poor decisions, struggling to find my way. I was angry, lost, alone, and suicidal. And then I became an adult, and I had no idea who I was. But I stand before you today, though, to say that it has all been worth it, every single bit of it.